I'm going to talk about the personal Hebrew letters of the 19th century maskilot as ego documents. In 2006, a groundbreaking anthology was published by Professors Cohen and Shmuel Feiner of Bar-Ilan University under the title A Voice of a Hebrew Maiden, Women's Writing of the 19th Century Haskalah Movement. Here is the book. And Haskalah meaning the Jewish Enlightenment movement, active in Central and Eastern Europe in the 18th and 19th century. The anthology features the Hebrew writings of 30 Jewish women who participated in the mission undertaken by the Haskalah in the second half of the 19th century to revive Hebrew as a modern secular language. These women are collectively referred to as the maskilot, which means enlightened women, in singular maskila. The anthology includes poetry, prose, and essays, as well as personal letters. It challenges the hegemonic historiography of modern Hebrew literature, according to which Hebrew writing by women began only in the pre-state Israel at the turn of the 20th century, in the writings of the pioneers of the first and second Aliyah. This notion is based on the assumption that in the 19th century Jewish girls were excluded from the study of Hebrew and its canonical texts, the Bible, the Talmud, etc. Indeed, most Jewish girls in 19th century Europe did not learn Hebrew, following the Talmudic prohibition on teaching the Torah to girls. Quote, "He who teaches his daughter the Torah teaches her vanity," end quote. However, a few girls were fortunate to have enlightened father who enabled them to study Hebrew with private tutors and sometimes in the cheder alongside the boys. Nevertheless, those Jewish women who mastered Hebrew and wrote in the language, in spite of the Talmudic prohibition, broke a religious and social taboo, and consequently most of them were reluctant to publish their writings. As a result, personal letters became a major vehicle for the maskilot to express themselves in Hebrew without exposing themselves to public disapproval. A personal letter did not violate the social norms of modesty appropriate for women, and did not challenge the Talmudic edicts, all glorious is the king's daughter within the palace, kol kvoda bat melech pnima, or a woman's voice is like nakedness, kol be'isha erva. It is not a surprise then that half of the anthology, A Voice of a Hebrew Maiden, 200 pages out of 400, consists of personal letters written by the maskilot throughout the 19th century. The letters were addressed to their former Hebrew tutors, their fathers, brothers, and other relatives or acquaintances, and were typically found in the archives of the addressees. The personal letters of the maskilot can serve as valuable ego documents in the research on Jewish women in 19th century Europe. Such research is offered, for example, in the essay, A Portrait of the Maskila as a Young Woman by Cohen, published in 2008 in Nashim, a journal of Jewish women's studies and gender issues. And it's available on the internet, I have it here. The article outlines the collective socioeconomic portrait of the maskilot, the aspects they shared in terms of family background and upbringing, and what set them apart from the rest of the Jewish women of their time and place who did not acquire knowledge of Hebrew. In this lecture, I would like to focus on what the personal letters of the maskilot tell us about the differences between them and the men of the Haskalah movement, the maskilim, enlightened men, in singular maskil, and also about the interaction between the two groups. I should point out that the maskilim also faced the disapproval of the orthodoxy for modernizing and secularizing the Holy Tongue. Yet it did not hinder them from publishing their writings. Some of them also urged the maskilot to join in their fight for the revival of Hebrew, as we will see. For example, the difference between a maskil and a maskila is provided in the collection A Treasure of Letters and Stories, here is the title page, published in St. Petersburg in 1882. The collection was edited by Yehuda Rosenberg, who included in it letters written by him and to him. One letter written by Rosenberg is addressed to a woman identified only as Tzertil, with whom he apparently corresponded. The letter begins with his praise for Tzertil for writing to him in Hebrew. Quote, I read your precious letters, written in the Hebrew language, and was very happy to know that the sparks of your love to this language did not fade during the years, the same years that greatly affected our brothers who dwell in Russia, and rooted out of them the sense of love to their people, their religion, and their language. I was very happy to know that your soul still feels the upright feeling of those who are wise among our people, who dedicate their entire life to repair their impairments of this humiliated and deserted language. End quote. Rosenberg points out the assimilation among Russian Jews, which was another challenge faced by the Haskalah movement, along with the opposition of the Orthodoxy. He then proceeds to reproach Tzertil for not publishing her writings. Quote, but I cannot resist telling you, gentle one, that you committed an error by turning the knowledge of our holy tongue into an end in itself. In my opinion, vain are all the things which do not have a purpose except knowledge alone, without having any connection to the world of life and action. Rosenberg then relates to Tzertil the outcome of his attempt to publish a story he had written and shared with her. He tells her that although his story was slated to be published in a Hebrew newspaper, extensive revisions are required by the newspaper's editor. Rosenberg recalls how Tzertil liked his story, in which he expressed his thoughts about, quote, matters of the utmost importance, end quote, and he's disappointed that his thoughts cannot be shared with the wide audience of Hebrew readers. Rosenberg's letter to Tzertil demonstrates the difference between a maskil like him, who had no reservations about publishing his personal letter, and a maskila like Tzertil, who was content to share her Hebrew writings with a friend like him. As said, the personal letters of the maskilot were typically found in the archives of their addressees. However, some of the letters are available to us because they were published in the Hebrew press of the period, sometimes without the writer's knowledge or consent. The anthology, A Voice of a Hebrew Maiden, includes personal letters written by 12 maskilot who were published in various venues. One such letter was written in 1852 by Yeti Volerner from Lvov, in the Ukraine, to the maskil Alexander Langbank, who took the liberty of publishing her letters in the journal Kochvei Yitzchak in Vienna, along with his response to her. And this is the title page. And interestingly enough, the letters are printed in Rashi script. That's another issue, interesting issue. And, okay. In her letter, Yeti explains to Langbank her refusal to publish her writings. Quote, why should I subdue my honor under the sword of criticism and arouse jealousy in disputes? The Hebrew language speaks to me and says, let go of me, do not touch what is holy. Not for that a woman is created. Your ideas were created to wander around the household, educate your sons, and manage your servants. End quote. Yet his letter illustrates the paralyzing effect of the religious prohibition on the maskilot, as well as Langbank's insensitivity in publishing it. His arguments in his response are similar to those of Rosenberg in his letter to Tzertil, but he also uses the opportunity to declare his opposition to the Talmudic decree that women should not have a part in learning, and to the blessing in the morning prayer, blessed art thou who did not make me a woman. Langbank concluded his response by assuring Yeti that he would protect her from criticism if she only published her writings, but she did not acquiesce. No further Hebrew letters by her were found after this experience. Remarkably, only one letter in A Voice of a Hebrew Maiden is addressed to another woman, indicating how isolated and uncommon were the Maskilot who could write Hebrew letters and read them. This letter was written by Miriam Markel Moseson, the first woman who translated a novel into Hebrew and published it, as we will see. Miriam was born in 1839 and died in 1920 and lived in several cities in what is today Poland and Lithuania, as well as in Vienna. Miriam was the only Maskila who kept copies of the letters she sent, along with the letters she received, so the letter addressed to another woman was found in her archive. Miriam's letter is addressed to, quote, "my good friend, the most honored among women," end quote, but the friend's identity remains unknown. In her letter, Miriam commends her friend's good Hebrew and the lovely and precise description of her household. Miriam then writes, "I imagine you surrounded by your children who are pulling on your dress, raising their hands up to you," end quote. And she regrets that her friend is overwhelmed by her duties as a housewife and mother and has stopped writing to her. It is evident from Miriam's letter that even the few women who could write in Hebrew were often held back by their domestic chores. Miriam herself was childless, so she did have the time for writing. An additional factor to consider then is that the Maskilot rarely corresponded with each other and did not create a support network. In fact, Yeti Vollrener wrote in her letter to Langbank that she was reluctant to flaunt her proficiency in Hebrew because she did not wish to stir up envy among young women like her. In contrast, the Maskilim, who were far more numerous than the Maskilot, corresponded with each other extensively and created a support network and a cultural community, in the words of Tova Cohen. Some of the Maskilot, however, found support in their correspondence with the poet Yehuda Leib Gordon, also known by the acronym YALAG. Gordon was an outspoken advocate of teaching Hebrew to Jewish girls and encouraged the Maskilot to write to him in Hebrew. A Voice of a Hebrew Maiden includes letters addressed to Gordon by 8 women, all found in his archive. A notable case is the correspondence between Gordon and Miriam Markel Moseson, which began in 1868 and extended over 2 decades, almost until his death. They became close friends and colleagues, although they never met in person due to geographic constraints. Early in their correspondence, Miriam expressed her concerns about publishing her Hebrew translation of the German novel The Jews and the Crusaders in England under Richard the Lionheart by Isaac Asher Frankel. Gordon read a manuscript of the translation and wrote to Miriam a commending letter, praising her accomplishment and her dedication. Gordon assured Miriam that her translation would be welcomed and applauded, and in 1869 she proceeded to publish it using his letter as the introduction. The publication of the translation was met with praise, along with some doubts that Miriam, a woman, was indeed the translator, but Gordon publicly defended her. When Miriam moved to Vienna, Gordon convinced her to send news reports to Hamelitz, the major newspaper of the Haskalah movement, and she became the first Hebrew woman journalist. Miriam's correspondence with Gordon was also published in 2004 under the title The Poet's Woman Friend, here is the book, along with her brief correspondence with Avraham Mapu, the first Hebrew novelist. Her archive includes her correspondence with additional Hebrew writers like Shneur Zaks, Yosef Chazanovich, Reuven Breinen, and Shalom Rabinovich, known as Shalom Aleichem. Miriam did not publish additional books except the second part of her translation, but her letters testify that she indeed entered the exclusive circles of the Maskilim. In her first letter to Gordon, in which she initiated the relationship, Miriam related how inspired she was by his early poem, The Love of David and Michal. Similarly, other Maskilot who wrote to Gordon emphasized their familiarity with his poems, letting him know that there were women out there who could read them. Oh, by the way, this is the title page of Miriam's novel translation. Okay. For example, Shayna Wolf from Grodno, today in Belarus, wrote to Gordon in 1881 about his poem, "For whom do I toil? Lemי אני עמל?" In this poem, Gordon regretted that Jewish women who were endowed with a gentle soul and a warm heart could not read his poetry since they were not taught Hebrew. In her letter, Shayna playfully concurs with Gordon, indicating that she did read his poems. Quote, "As one of those women, I can testify that your words are true," end of quote. She proceeds to let him know that his poem, "The Tip of the Yod," קוצו של יוד, in which he protested the plight of Jewish deserted wives, as in the book of Dr. Chaim Sperber, has indeed touched the hearts of women readers like her. As part of serving as their Hebrew mentor, Gordon prompted the Maskilot to write to him about themselves and their lives, and they did. For example, Shayna Wolf responded to his question on how she was bringing up her children. Quote, "Why do you ask me if I raise them for Torah and matrimony or for good deeds? Is only one extremity good? Are good deeds opposed to Torah and matrimony, God forbid, or vice versa?" End quote. And in response to Gordon's question on what her life was like, Shayna answered candidly, quote, "Since the day I began to understand life, there were times I did not find any passion in it." And she added in parentheses the Yiddish word Lebenslust. She continued, "There were days when I said I was happy, hours when I cursed my daily burden, all according to the circumstances of the time and according to the state of my spirit and my heart." End quote. Shayna's disclosure of her emotional life is impressive, since she wrote in a language which was not her native tongue. Her openness was shared by other Maskilot who felt comfortable to relate to Gordon personal episodes from their life. A prominent example is a letter from Sarah Fage Menken, the first woman who published a Hebrew novel, a Hebrew children's story, and a Hebrew memoir. She was born in 1854 and died in 1937, and lived in several cities, including Riga, Vilnius, Lodz, London, and Pittsburgh. Her letter to Gordon was written in 1884 and indicates that 3 years earlier she sent him the manuscript of her Hebrew novel, and he returned it with his comments on how she should revise it. Sarah's novel was indeed published in 1881 under the title "The Love of the Righteous," and Gordon wrote a mostly positive review of it, which he published in Voschod, the Russian language Jewish journal. However, in her letter, Sarah also relates to Gordon the tragic episode of her marriage to the maskil Yehoshua Mezach after the publication of her novel. According to her letter, Mezach abandoned her when she was pregnant, denied having married her and his paternity of her son, and took all her money, preventing her from publishing the second part of her novel. Sarah's letter provides extensive details about the circle of the Maskilim in Vilnius, where she met Mezach. It also illustrates the vulnerability of a Maskila who tried to live independently and publish her writings on her own. Sarah's letter ended with her appeal to Gordon to use his influence and put pressure on Mezach to acknowledge their marriage and grant her a divorce. Gordon's response to Sarah's appeal is unknown, since her son did not keep her papers after her death. We do know, however, that Mezach did grant her a divorce, and she married the Hebrew playwright Meir Foner. Another personal letter of a Maskila who wished to publish her novel appeared also in A Treasure of Letters and Stories. It was written by Toibe Segal from Bichawak in Poland to a friend from her hometown who moved to St. Petersburg. The friend's name does not appear on the letter, so his identity remains unknown. In her letter, Toibe asks her friend for assistance in securing a publisher for a novel she had written in Yiddish, which was rejected by several publishers. She indicates that she already sent him the manuscript and expresses her willingness to translate it into Hebrew if he thinks it will make it more publishable. Toibe is also voicing her frustration with him for not responding to her previous requests for help. Quote, "Please consider, my dear sir and friend, how frustrated I have been seeing that days have passed, even years flew by and are gone, during which you could have, without hesitation, lend me your hand and do something on my behalf." Toibe's novel was not published in Hebrew or in Yiddish, but she did publish a long militant essay in Hebrew in the journal Ha'ivri under the title "The Question of Women." Toibe's letter, like Sarah Fege's letter to Gordon and Miriam's correspondence with him, testify that some of the maskilot, overcame the religious and social taboo and wished to publish the Hebrew writings. The maskilim were not always helpful, but when they did, like Gordon, they made it possible for those maskilot to take part in the revival of Hebrew openly. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to know is Yehuda Gordon, was he unusual among the male masculine encouraging female authors?
No, not really. I mean, he was really unusual. I mean, I pointed out that Langbank really wanted Yeti Wollner to publish in Hebrew, and also Yehuda Rosenberg wrote to Zertil that she should publish, but they didn't encourage them to such an extent that Gordon did. I mean, Gordon just came out and said, any woman who writes in Hebrew, write to me, and he started corresponding with them, and really, exchanged all these letters, and yeah, so he was a one-man enterprise. And I should point out that another maskil, David Frischman, actually was opposed to women writing in Hebrew, although he was a maskil, so it wasn't clear that all of them really wanted women to join their ranks. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting, and I think it's also interesting when you look at the emergence of modern Yiddish as a literary language, that a lot of the early Yiddishes had to encourage each other to like dive down into the language of the common people and women. You know, so many were reluctant to do so.
Yeah, and some of them they published under a pen name. Yes.
Under a man's name, not only a pen name, but also using a name of a man.
Oh yeah.
In many cases,
yeah.
You've got, especially feuilletons in Hebrew newspapers that are signed by men, but we know that it was written by a woman. So it's even one of related to American Moses, but I think you're not sure that it's her. Here is Paul wrote a bit about it. So
yeah. I mean, there was even a Yiddish newspaper that directed at women, Kol Mevaser, I think it was actually.
Well, Kol Mevaser is it's not related to women. It's
but more widely read by women.
Yes, so. Because masculine used to read in Hebrew, not in Yiddish.
Yeah.
So this is basically why, unlike the Hebrew newspapers that were very successful in the 1960s, Kol Mevaser was the only Yiddish newspaper, and it was part of Amelitz.
Yeah.
The editor of Amelitz actually funded this paper, and it lasted only 7 years.
Oh, okay.
So the Yiddish newspapers really began again only in 1903 with the find in the Russian Empire.
Yeah.
So, and it was not aimed toward women. It was aimed toward those Jews that are more religious, or proposing to read Hebrew as a day-to-day language.
Yes.
So I think that saying that it was aimed to women, I'm not sure.
Well, it was
Because
aimed at common men who are like women.
I know.
Sometimes I think there was this expression, common men who are like women. Okay.
The book is for women and those men who are uneducated.
Yeah.
So this is the
so Kol Mevaves,
way
I
to look
think,
at it.
yeah.
Women uneducated are hypocrites.
Yeah. And Kol Mevaves, I think, was
but I think Menachem.
Yeah.
I think there are a few distinctions that need to be made. First of all, when we speak between what we speak when we're referring to enlightenment and what we are referring to with the term of Haskalah. Usually when we are speaking about Haskalah, there is also an ideology related to the use of Hebrew included in that term. While enlightenment or general knowledge is something totally different. In a study which I did, in which I concentrated on Orthodox men and women in the 19th century till today, I was exploring how the subject of general studies. And I discovered that throughout the 19th century, there's a growing number of Orthodox men and women who were exposed to general studies, but those studies were taught in the Russian Empire, they were taught in Russia.
But I was
so
talking
we have a large number of Orthodox women who could read and write in Russian, and they were exposed to the contemporary literature and novels and theater.
Yeah, but that's why I spoke about assimilation. That was another challenge of. I was talking about in the second half of the 19th century. Then I think that there was really an attempt by the Haskalah movement to revive Hebrew as a secular and modern language.
Yeah, but still, at that time you have. I didn't explore that field, but since many Orthodox women, and in that time there was no objection
for them,
for the women to study general studies.
But not
perhaps the objection was to write in Hebrew in general, not just for women, but in general, the writing in Hebrew as it was captured as the holy
because but it didn't hinder them, as I said, hinder the men. It hindered the women because they were also concerned about the fact that they were not supposed to know, to even being taught Hebrew, to know Hebrew.
No, they should have known Hebrew because they were taught to pray in Hebrew. And
very few.
No, it was quite common. Women were taught Hebrew in order to know how to pray and how to read the Pentateuch. Yes, they needed to know that.
I'm not so sure. I mean, I don't know.
Even the Tzemmerena, the version was. One side was in Hebrew, and then there was a translation into Yiddish. But basically, a Jewish woman should know Hebrew, at least in order to know to read.
If her parents can afford to get her a tutor, I mean, where will she learn Hebrew? She cannot go to the cheder with the boys unless
they
were not few, but not
even the boys could not understand Hebrew. You can read Shaul research about knowing Hebrew. They could read, but not understand.
Yeah, it's two different things. I mean that the first thing you have this social thing that most of the people could only most of the Jews, both the men and women, they could read Hebrew and read the prayers, and they decided the Pentateuch at Heder, but they didn't understand it. That's true. But if we speak about the higher social strata, then both the boys and the girls were usually taught Hebrew.
It depends on the level.
And what is interesting that I see it a lot. I work a lot with the autobiographers to discuss in the mostly second half of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century in the Russian Empire, and in many cases, women who write their autobiography, they refer to the fact that in their childhood they were taught Hebrew, they were taught to Torah, and they were taught to Tanakh as well. So it's not so extremely rare. So I mean,
But Eliana Adler, are you familiar with Eliana Adler's book? So she does point out that the Hebrew, and it's not just a matter of knowing the letters, and it's knowing the texts. I mean, the Bible, the Talmud, the theological works. It was, I mean, she gave the curriculum of the schools and how little, how few hours they had a weekly hours they had compared with the boys.
Yeah, but so Eliana Adler so writes about the formal schooling,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
But there was also kind of homeschooling.
Oh yeah, if
there
they
was
could afford
also-
if they could afford to hire a tutor, but most.
No, but for example, there are a lot of cases when the father was the melamed.
Oh yeah,
and his
yeah. Then
daughters
he would
went
let.
together, and
That was the
it
case of
just
Yeti Vollerener, by the way.
super
Yeah.
super common.
and
And they
so
no, honestly, it's so from my survey of autobiographies, and I surveyed about
Okay, so maybe they did.
hundreds of them. So
okay.
it's really,
Yeah.
I mean, it's really common.
So it's still maybe it's just more prominent the fact that they didn't do anything with this knowledge, that they didn't go out like the Masculine and fight for the revival of the
That's
Hebrew
the point.
language.
That's the difference
Yeah.
between knowing and kind of
Yes,
kind of
okay,
publishing
okay.
or
Yeah, we never know how many of them did know. Yeah,
I have a novice type question.
yeah.
In a place like Odessa, where you had all these
Yeah.
luminary
Uh-huh.
Zionist Hebrew masculine,
Yeah.
were there women there also?
Yeah.
Later on, I think.
Like
It's
when-
not,
The 1860s, not before.
So who were the front row women?
Miriam Markel Moseson, but she
Yeah,
didn't live in Odessa. Miriam Markel Moseson is the first woman who published a book in Hebrew, the translation of her novel.
And where
That
did
was-
she live?
Oh, she moved around because of her husband. He was in business, a businessman. So they moved in. They lived in several cities. They lived in. She was born in Lithuania. They lived in Kovna, and then they moved into Danzig, and then to Vienna. I mean, they sort of lived in several cities. But and then there was Sarah Foner, who published on whom I wrote my dissertation. And anyway, and she was born in Lithuania, and she moved around also. Because she married a Polish Jew, I mean Meir Foner, so she lived in Lodz, but then she moved with her son to England and the US. I don't think that there were women in Odessa in the 1860s. I mean, with the circle of the masculine.
There are.
There are few maybe, but did they publish anything?
No.
Okay, so,
And this is, I think that,
No, I mean, of course,
I think
some
that,
of them-
Katya, you are right. I think that there is a difference between being involved with the movement
Yeah,
and
yeah.
publishing.
Oh,
But you
yeah.
can also
Yeah.
see it when you
Yeah.
talk about the English Enlightenment movement. A woman like Mary Westerhout, who
Yeah.
was involved in them. Nobody let them publish. She was boycotted when she tried to publish something.
yeah.
So I think, I'm not sure that it's similar to what happened in Jewish history in Europe, but men don't like women writing.
Yeah, I think this was the case of
So
Paul de
that's,
Segal, because she was very
and I'm
militant.
talking about the
Yeah.
masculine, not about the Orthodox.
Yeah,
Both in the general Enlightenment movement and in the Haskalah movement.
yeah.
So, and it's not only in the East European Haskalah, it's also in the Berlin Haskalah,
Yeah.
Haskalah Berlin and others. You don't find women over there.
Yeah.
You find them in the salons,
Right.
but not in the writing. They are important in the activity. Henrietta Hertz is hosting people in her salon, but she doesn't write.
Yeah,
And
but
she
that's early.
asked for men performers, being poets or players, to come and perform, actors, come and perform. But she is the host.
Yeah.
She is not the writer. And there is a level, I think that you are right, between being a publisher or publishing something, that is strictly a male domain, and being involved in the movement, which is something different.
Uh-huh. Well, the point is that in this, anthology, I know that they really combed all the archives of possible recipients, and the only archive of a woman was that of Miriam Markel Moseson, and I mean, they published the letters that they found in the, and they only found 30 women who wrote in Hebrew. So even if they knew Hebrew like Tzertil or Yativ Olderner, they didn't want to publish anything, and the issue was that they were paralyzed by that Talmudic decree and also by the social disapproval that it was more than the type of.
How many women writing do you find in the Russian literature of the period?
Well, there was Rachel Mironov Nachin, which was really a Jewish woman, and
not too many.
That's
so,
right.
And it's a much wider bulk of writing.
No, I agree.
So
I agree. No, but I'm talking about
there is a certain unwillingness to accept a woman writer.
Oh yeah,
in European society altogether. It doesn't matter if they're Orthodox or Reform or etc. etc. I think this is the issue.
Yeah, and but I want to also point out that in the 19th century we already see Jewish women publishing in German and in Yiddish, and it is more common. I mean, publishing stories in newspapers, so it's more common than in Hebrew, that's for sure. So, okay, I guess.
Just a technical comment about us as historians.
Yeah.
I think when we speak about the Enlightenment men, we use a family name, and when we talk about the women, we use a private name.
No, that's
and I
right.
think we have to.
Yes. I do it to distinguish Sarah Fege-Foner from her husband Meir Foner. I mean, I find I cannot refer to her as Foner because then it will be the same as her husband, the playwright Meir Foner. But it's true. I mean, everybody says Miriam. Nobody says Markel Moseson. It's, well, I guess that's the. It is interesting, and even today we say Bialik. We don't say Chaim Nachman, but we say Rachel for the poet. So, okay. So
this may be the exception of Rachel Morfurgo.
Morfurgo,
that you use both the family name.
That's right. Rachel Morfurgo. That's right. Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah, but she came from a different milieu.
Yeah, she was from Italy,
I think that
so.
you're right. Pointing out that he is a man, so the surname goes, and she is a woman. So
We have to.
that's a point to consider.
I just would like to add something that even in 19th century Britain, the Bronte sisters have a hard time publishing Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, and they start as writing in the name of a man. So this is something that.
But it's not in the Jewish case.
Yeah, but I'm talking also.
Grace Aguilar.
Yeah, that's right.
Her private name and then surname as well.
But I'm writing about publishing letters in the newspapers, for instance, like this אוצר מכתבים וסיפורים. I mean, or not novels, not complete novels, and we don't see that many women there. And we see that when something by a woman is published, and the editor is saying, "Oh, there is a woman writing." I found this funny letter from a woman about a fire in her hometown, asking for people to help. So the editor puts it, "Oh, look, this woman is writing in Hebrew, let's publish it." I mean, he's not pointing out the fire and having to help their community. So it's, it's just that women were not supposed to know Hebrew or to write in Hebrew or something. So it's called כבודה בת מלך פנימה. Yes, you can know Hebrew, but keep it for yourself. So, okay.
We're not supposed to interfere in a male society.
Yeah, okay, so, all right. Thank you. Okay.